My boss mocked my work and said, "You're replaceable." 6 months later, the company got bought out, and I was the one who signed the deal. His face turned gray when I walked into the room. Before anything else, "Tell me where you're watching from. Your city? Your couch? Your lunch break? The late train home? I want to picture the place where this story meets you. Because I remember exactly where mine began. A glass conference room that never quite held sound right, the hum of the elevator cables behind the wall, and rain stitching the windows while I tried to keep my face still. Eric, my boss, didn't sit so much as sprawl at the head of the table like he had grown there. He flicked my report so the pages skidded and fanned across the shining surface. "This is amateur work," he said, not looking at me. Then he lifted his eyes and let them settle on my face like a dare. "You're replaceable, Maya." A careful laugh moved through the room, the kind of laugh people use when they want to be on the side that looks safe. The word replaceable hit the glass and came back to me over and over. I felt it in my teeth. I did not argue. I gathered each sheet, smoothing the bent corners, and said only, "Got it." The lemon cleaner on the table stung my nose. His coffee left a lipstick print on the rim that wasn't his. The projector threw a gray halo over the wall clock. I watched the second-hand sweep and thought, remember everything. I drove home slow so I could be alone with the sound of the rain, the wipers breathing their small, patient breaths. In traffic, I touched the recipe card I keep tucked inside my wallet, the one my grandmother wrote in the sloping blue letters she learned as a girl. Onion, cumin, patience. The last ingredient always made me smile. In the little kitchen where I grew up, she used to say, "Eat, then decide." She believed food made your hands steady and your mouth honest. She also said, "When they mock your worth, make them regret opening their mouths, but don't raise your voice to do it." I tried to picture her at my sink in her house dress, the steam fogging her glasses, humming under her breath while the oil crackled. The city lights smeared into soft ribbons, and I repeated what I promised her once when I was 19 and crying over a grade that felt like the end of something. I will not let anyone reduce me. The words sat in my chest like a stone I could stand on. Days turned slippery after that. The office had a way of pushing you into its rhythm. Ding of the elevator, beeps of badges, the coffee machine's heavy sigh every hour. Eric didn't shout. He never needed to. He could cut with a small knife. He started lifting my slides out of decks before they reached the board. He began calling our model the engine of his strategy in meetings where I wasn't invited. He would forward threads and accidentally drop my name from the CC when the decision went up a level. At first, people looked guilty when they saw me in the kitchen, and then they just looked past me. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was how ordinary it began to feel. Like bad paint you stop noticing. I tried to sleep and couldn't, tried to eat and found every bite stuck halfway down, but there was a steady voice inside me that said, "Look. Record. Learn. Silence isn't weakness unless you're using it to hide." I wasn't hiding. I was collecting. The escalation came quiet and mean. A Tuesday. The office smelled like rain and coats and old carpet. I logged in and my project folder, the one with 2 years of experiments and validation reports and careful notes that would make a stranger feel at home in my code, flashed red. Access denied. I checked again. Same result. I walked to IT, flats on because I had learned that heels sing their own music on the tile. "It was reassigned," the guy said, eyes not quite on mine. "Approved by Eric," I thanked him. Inside the bathroom, the mirror showed me a new line between my eyebrows, a little trench from too many nights reading my phone in the dark. I pressed the line flat and told my reflection, "Not today." That afternoon, at the all hands where the plant in the corner always looked thirsty and the air tasted like nerves, Eric announced a promotion for a man who'd started 3 weeks ago, a man who learned very quickly to stand to Eric's right. "Maybe you'll get there next year, if you're still around," Eric said into the mic, as if he had told a harmless joke about the weather. The careful laugh again. It sounded like screws rolling across metal. I clapped like the others because sometimes applause is a shield. When I lowered my hands, my plan had started. I did not quit. People told me later they would have walked out. I didn't. I tightened my work like a braid. I printed what was mine to print. Personal research notes, process diagrams I had drawn by hand before they became company artifacts. The kind of thinking that lives in your private drafts before it becomes property. I bought a small notebook with a hard blue cover and recorded dates, times, who said what, who looked where, which emails came, which emails went. I learned to forward certain threads to my personal address as follow-up reminders with nothing sensitive inside, just to keep a memory of timing. I labeled everything as if a stranger would one day need to read it fast. I also wrote small lines to myself in the margins like anchors. Breathe. Play long. Do not use anger for fuel. It burns too hot and too quick. I met my friend from grad school for tea in a place with low light and a server who understood when we asked for a quiet corner. She had become a lawyer with the calmest voice I had ever heard. I told her almost everything, minus the pieces she shouldn't hear. She told me the borders of clean behavior in plain words. Be boring, she said. Boring wins courtrooms, boardrooms, and middle school bake sales. You will do nothing that looks like theft, threat, or tantrum. You will do everything that looks like clarity, patience, and good record-keeping. I laughed at bake sales. She didn't. She meant it. Also, she added, stirring her tea, a calm woman with receipts is a natural disaster. I followed her advice like it was a recipe. Work until 6. Document until 7. Walk the floor after most lights went out, not to snoop, just to understand how the machine moved when it was tired. I learned who held the keys to which lockers, which servers rebooted the slowest, which dashboards had been duct taped together by people who pretended the tape was a bow. I learned where risk lived because I had built the first safe room inside the engine, audit trails for every major decision. Early in my time there, I fought for a logging layer that would record model versions, thresholds, overrides, the name and login of the human who pushed the decision across the line. People smiled at me like I was cute for caring about the boring part. I built it anyway. Later, when the quarterly numbers didn't look like the curves my models predicted, I checked the logs and saw a pattern of small human hands on big levers without notes to explain the push. I did not make accusations. I did analysis. I breathed. I stared out the window and counted buses. And I kept one sentence ready: check the overrides. The turning point arrived dressed like nothing. An email with no exclamation point, no bold letters, no promise of the future. Subject: confidential consultation opportunity. A private investment group had questions about our sector and our company's structure. They wanted someone who could speak about industry practice, risk profiles, and cultural patterns. That last part spelled out like it mattered more than most leaders admit. They were careful about lines. The very first paragraph asked me to involve counsel to ensure compliance with my employment terms. That care made me believe them. I forwarded the email to my friend, and she drafted a consulting agreement with boundaries you could see from space. I could explain publicly known information, widely used frameworks, and general analysis that any independent researcher could derive. I could not disclose company secrets, proprietary algorithms, or non-public performance. I would be paid for my time, not for any result. I would meet them in a neutral space and take notes as if everything I said would be printed on the front page of a newspaper my grandmother would read. I signed with hands that did not shake. When I sat with them, 3 people who asked short questions and listened like their lives depended on the answer. I spoke the way I wish people had spoken to me on my first day at the company. Simple, specific, clean. I explained that our field has 2 freedoms that often trip companies. First, models with too many knobs invite executive fingers. Second, cultures that worship a single visionary produce bad math because fear makes people stupid. I told them the engine at our company could be world-class if 3 things changed: the way we tracked overrides, the way we allocated credit, and the way we punished mistakes. I did not say Eric's name. I did not need to. I said, if you acquire, make the audit trail the spine. Let the numbers argue with the humans in public. When they asked where the risk lived right now, I said, wherever decisions walk around after midnight without shoes. One of them smiled at that. Another wrote it down word for word. I went home after each session and cooked a small meal like my grandmother would, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted my house to smell like choices I made for myself. I kept my windows cracked to hear the city at night, a mix of sirens and laughter and the sound of a distant train that made me feel like I was inside a film that knew exactly where it wanted to go. In the office, rumors began the way rumors always begin. Someone with a too loud whisper near the elevators, a link left open and quickly closed, a senior manager who suddenly started wearing better suits. A buyout, people said, and the word moved like electricity through metal. Eric started walking like he owned the air, saying we when he meant I, and I when he meant me. He didn't know that the group he bragged about charming had hired me to design the transition for the analytics division if the deal went through. He didn't know because the group understood discretion, and because I remembered the blue lines of my grandmother's handwriting telling me, patience. The day they invited me to preview the transition plan with the full team, I wore the simple black dress I save for moments when I want my presence to be quiet but undeniable. I slipped the bracelet my grandmother left me around my wrist, the one with a tiny clasp that always takes 2 tries, as if it wants to be sure I mean it. My friend, the lawyer, had looked at every line of the plan and had said, "This is clean. It is also sharp." She smiled when she said sharp. I packed my notes, checked the pen in my purse twice, and stood at my window long enough to watch a bus open its doors and close them again. A small ritual that always makes me think of how ordinary thresholds are. Open, step through, close, continue. On my way out, I looked at the recipe card in my wallet and heard her voice say, "Eat." I peeled a clementine and ate it on the sidewalk, fingers sticky, sun warm on the side of my face. Then I went to the meeting. The boardroom at the investor's office did not look like ours. It was warmer in color, quiet without being sterile, and the art on the walls made sense to no one and everyone at the same time. The lead investor had a scar near his ear like a comma marking a sentence he wasn't finished with. He shook my hand and said, "We're ready when you are," and I believed him. I laid my notes on the table, but I didn't need them for the first part. I could do the introduction by heart, what the engine does, where transparency lives, how governance grows. I spoke slow because I wanted them to hear every word land. Simple words are heavy when you place them right. I described how, if they wanted a healthy company, they would need to make sure the model's logs were sacred and accessible, that managers couldn't turn numbers into smoke. I described the kind of leadership that makes analysts brave, the kind that asks, "Show me your assumptions," and says thank you when flaws are found. No one interrupted me. When I finished, the room felt like a held breath. They asked me then for names. I gave them roles instead, the way a surgeon might talk about hands and stamina and calm instead of gossiping about the last staff party. You need leaders who teach, I said. You need people who document. You need at least one person who loves to ask, "What did we miss?" and won't stop until the room turns the question into air instead of poison. The lead investor nodded and tapped his pen once. "And the current leadership?" he asked. I paused and let the window light fall across the table, the dust making the air visible for a moment like truth does. "I can tell you which behaviors will harm your investment," I said. "If you see hoarding of information, punishing for questions, praising without attribution, or hands-on overrides without secure notes, those are fires waiting for oxygen. If the person at the top models those behaviors, the flames are already there. You asked me for risk. That is the risk." He looked at me a long second, then said, "Understood." Back at the company, the whisper was no longer a whisper. Eric strutted as if he had harpooned the whale and was towing it home against the current with his bare teeth. "We secured the deal," he told a group in the corridor, using the royal we the way old kings used the plural. The new guy moved around him in a small orbit, close enough to glow, far enough not to burn. I kept my desk clean and my calendar boring. I sent my team a note that said, "If you can document one thing this week so a stranger can understand it, document that thing. If you can teach one person one concept in a way they'll remember, teach it. If you can choose between polish and clarity, choose clarity. A few wrote back with thumbs up. One came to my desk and said, "Is this about the buyout?" I said, "It's about being good at our jobs." Both were true. The official notice hit a week later. Proposed terms, target close, leadership review. The board scheduled a session with our department heads. My name appeared in an email thread that did not come to me from inside. It came from the outside, the people who had listened like their lives depended on it. They asked me to attend the session as the person who would explain, in simple language, how the data transition would work. They wanted me to sit near the front, not at the head. They wanted me to bring the plan printed on paper and on a drive. They wanted me to be prepared to answer questions I had already answered for them in smaller rooms, but now with bigger ears. I read the email twice and felt the steady stone in my chest grow warm. The night before the session, I couldn't sleep, so I cooked. I cut an onion slowly and let it turn gold before I added the cumin and the tomatoes. I stirred with the wooden spoon my grandmother used, the one worn thin where her thumb rested for years. I ate at the counter and looked at the city spread in my window like circuit boards. I thought of the first day I walked into the company, the way everything felt too bright and too important. I thought of the first time Eric told me I was ambitious in that way that means dangerous if I let you breathe. I thought of the new people I had hired inside my head, the ones I would choose if I ever got to choose, and I promised them silently that in any room I ran, their names would be on their slides and their hands would be credited for their work. I washed the pan and set it to dry, then took the recipe card from my wallet and wiped a tiny splash of sauce from the corner with the edge of a clean towel. When I finally slept, I dreamed I was standing in a room made of glass that became water, and I was walking across it like it could hold me. And it did. Morning's light felt like a decision. I wore the black dress again, the bracelet that takes 2 tries and shoes that made no sound. I arrived early and sat in the empty boardroom, my notes in a neat stack, my drive labeled with a piece of tape in block letters, simple as a lunch bag. I breathed in for 4, out for 6, the way my therapist taught me during a year when the world wanted too much from me. One by one, the investors arrived, sleeves rolled up, eyes clear. The lead investor nodded at me with the respect of someone who intends to keep their promises. Then the door opened and the air changed. I didn't have to turn to know it was Eric. Some people carry a weather system with them. Small gusts of heat, a pressure drop. He was mid-sentence selling his future, and the words hit the carpet and died when he saw me. He stalled, blinked, tried to turn his mouth back into a smile and couldn't quite remember how. I stood, my hands easy at my sides. "Good to see you again, Eric," I said, and the steady stone inside my chest settled like a cornerstone being placed at last. The lead investor gestured to a chair that wasn't the head and said, "Let's begin." And we did. The lead investor asked me to begin, and I did what I always do when the stakes are high. I used simple words and moved in a straight line. I laid out the plan in calm layers, like stacking clean plates. First, the audit trail that would become the spine of our work, then the version control, then the handover protocol that explained how every decision would have a name, a reason, and a place to live. I talked about the dashboards as if they were windows we would keep clear, not mirrors we would use to admire ourselves. I talked about the model registry, about testing, about the way we would teach the next analyst to pick up where the last analyst left off without feeling like they were stepping into a secret club. I did not speak faster when Eric shifted in his chair. I did not look at him when he made a small noise under his breath. I drank water and let the silence between sections settle like dust you can see in the light. I answered questions with yes, no, and "Here's the clean path." I said "we" when I meant the team that would exist after this room decided, to build a future that did not require magic tricks to look good. When it was time to discuss continuity of leadership, the phrase everyone uses when they mean who stays, who goes. I unfolded one page I had printed in large type, 4 short lines and nothing else. Line 1, we keep leaders who teach. Line 2, we keep leaders who document. Line 3. We keep leaders who ask better questions than they give orders. Line 4. We keep leaders who give credit like oxygen. The lead investor read the page, then turned it to show the others. It looked almost childish, which is why it worked. It was hard to argue with. Not once did I say Eric's name. I didn't have to. The room had already learned the difference between a person who builds an engine and a person who stands near it and calls the noise his own. Eric tried anyway. With all due respect, he said, and that phrase always means no respect is coming. There's a narrative developing here that discounts the value of vision. Someone has to make the big bets. His voice had a wobble in it that he tried to press flat with volume. We cannot reduce leadership to paperwork. I kept my eyes on the plan. Documentation isn't paperwork, I said. It's how you make vision repeatable without you in the room. I could feel the investors watching our exchange like a tennis match they wished would finish quickly. When vision lives only in one man's mouth, the company is one bad day away from chaos. I looked up then and met his eyes. You've had the floor for years. Today the engine speaks. The lead investor leaned forward. We've reviewed performance patterns across several quarters, he said, voice even. We see value in energy and bets. We also see that the data discipline has been compromised by undocumented overrides. We will not run a company that way. It was not a question. It was not even a threat. It was simply the ground we would stand on from now on. He turned to me. Please continue, Maya. I brought up the slide about overrides. The projector hummed. The numbers were simple because I wanted the judgment to be fair. A bar for every quarter, a small red mark when a model went one way and a human finger pushed it another, and a tiny note when the reason was logged. Most bars had red without notes. I did not say bonus. I did not say Eric. I said, we will not do this going forward. If a human wants to touch the wheel, they will write why. If we crash, we will read why. If we win, we will read why. That's how we learn. That's how we grow up. Maybe it was the word why said too many times in a room that used to prefer because I said so. Maybe it was the way the air felt like it had decided to be thinner around Eric. But he made a final try. Let's be honest, he said, turning to the investors. She's talented, but she is also... He paused, searching for the word that would make the room small enough to hold his version. Emotional about the past. This is a lot of righteousness. He smiled, a tight line that didn't know how to relax. We can't run a company on moral lectures. I thought of my grandmother then. The small kitchen, the recipe card with blue letters, and how she would tilt her head when someone tried to sound clever to hide an empty bowl. I didn't lift my voice. I didn't trade insults. I just spoke one quiet sentence to the table, not to him. Integrity is not a lecture, I said. It's a system. The lead investor set his pen down. Another investor said, agreed. The decision had been a door, and we had already walked through it. What happened next took only minutes. A legal counselor from the acquiring team read the transition language about the executive structure. It was not personal. It was procedural. It spoke of roles that would not continue post-close and roles that would be redefined under new governance. Eric's position was in the first group. There were phrases about severance, cooperation, return of property, confidentiality, all in the tidy rhythm of a language that has practiced being cold so it won't catch fire. Security wasn't dramatic. They did not touch him. They asked him to stop by his office to gather what was his under supervision. Someone had a brown box like a cliché. He stood, tried to perform a laugh, failed, then stared at the table where the pen I would sign with waited like a quiet little sword. His eyes flicked to me for a single second, not angry now, just empty. Then he walked out. You could feel the weather system leave with him. The room was normal air again. No one clapped. People think moments like this end with cheering. They don't. Real closure is quiet. The lead investor turned to me and asked if there were any final risks I wanted to name before we moved to signatures. I gave him 3. The risk of burnout during the transition, the risk of a small group hoarding knowledge out of fear, the risk of the team overcorrecting and becoming so cautious they forgot how to try. I proposed a counter to each risk, rotating on-call support so no one broke, a documentation sprint with prizes that were actually meaningful, and a monthly, we tried and failed forum where the failure of the month got a donut and a laugh and a lesson, not a penalty. We will normalize curiosity, I said. We will treat mistakes as tuition, not crimes. He nodded. Do it. Then the papers came out. The acquisition agreement felt heavy when I lifted the first page, the way some books feel heavy because you can tell they contain a future. I read the section that mattered to me twice, even though I had read it before with my friend who knows how to make clauses behave. When they slid the pen toward me, it wasn't the one with the engraved initials. It was a plain black pen, clean, unpretentious. I clicked it once, heard the little sound, and signed with a hand that did not shake. The room watched, not me, but the moment. We were making a thing real. When I finished, the lead investor signed, then the council signed, then a board member signed. It felt like a relay where everyone holds the same baton and no one needs to run alone. Afterwards, people said words that mean congratulations without saying that word. Good work. Clean plan. We're lucky to have you. I thanked them and didn't stay long. I went to the window at the end of the hall and looked at the city. Rain had washed the morning and now the buildings looked honest. I put my hand on the cool glass and let out a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding since the day Eric called me replaceable. I thought of that first meeting. The lemon cleaner, the lipstick on the cup, the way the projector halo made the clock tired. I thought of the feeling I had then, the cold shock that turned to stone, and I understood finally that the stone had been useful. It gave me something to stand on while the ground kept tilting. I whispered, "Thank you," to no one, and to the woman who taught me to hold my voice at the right height. The weeks that followed looked ordinary and felt new. I moved into the corner office, not because I needed the corner, but because the team needed to see that the person in that chair would be different now. The first thing I put on the desk was the plant that had been dying in the all-hands room. It perked up like a person who finally gets called by their name. The second thing was a framed photo of my grandmother with flour on her cheek, grinning like she had wanted something she didn't even enter. I opened the bottom drawer and found the pen with Eric's initials. It lay there like a joke from an old party. I turned it in my hand. My face in the metal looked like a stranger's for a second, and then like me again. I set it back and closed the drawer quietly. Some trophies are only heavy if you pretend they belong on a shelf. We rebuilt. Not with slogans or posters, but with small habits that could withstand bad days. We wrote a why next to every what. We put names on slides and credits on the last page of every deck where the names are big enough to read without squinting. We started Brown Bag Clarity, a weekly lunch where anyone could ask how anything worked, all questions welcome, no one allowed to say that's basic. We created a repository where junior analysts could leave notes for the next junior who would sit at their desk. This is the bug that will make you cry for an hour. Here is the fix. This is the stakeholder who says, just a quick change and means a week, set boundaries. This is the latte that is closest to the office when you need a walk. Work and kindness living side by side like roommates who actually get along. I hired 2 people Eric had once called too much. In that tone men use when they sense a woman's talent and try to rename it as a problem. They were brilliant and brave and funny. I gave them big problems first, not small ones, and then stood back. They asked questions I loved hearing. What if this assumption is just tradition in a lab coat? What happens if we remove the fancy feature and go simple on purpose? What if we swap the dashboard colors for accessibility? I answered when I could. When I couldn't, I said, let's find out. They learned fast, failed fast, documented like champions, and taught as they went. When they presented to the board for the first time, their names were on the first slide, and I sat 3 rows back so they could own the room. Their hands didn't shake. When the board praised the work, both analysts turned and pointed to the whole team. We built this, they said, and it was the best sentence I had heard in months. Sometimes, In the kitchen, where the new coffee tastes less like apology and more like a choice, a person would pull me aside and say, "Do you ever regret not saying something to him back then?" In the meeting, I always told the truth. No. Because giving him my volume would have given him my center, and I needed my center to build something he could never enter again. I am not a saint. I had my small, mean thoughts, my little movies where I imagined witty final lines and dramatic exits. But the thing that felt best was not his pale face or his box or even my signature on the papers. It was Tuesday at 2:15 on a normal week, when a junior analyst laughed loud in the office because she found a bug before the numbers made a fool of someone. It was the Slack message that said, "I made a mistake, here it is, here's what I learned," and the replies that said, "Thank you," and "happens to all of us," and "saving this note for later." It was watching fear leave a room and curiosity move in with boxes labeled books, mugs, light. I kept my evenings slow when I could. I cooked simple food in the small pan I bought from my grandmother's old market, even though I didn't need another pan. I would hear her in the steam. Eat, then decide. I decided to forgive, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Forgiveness, I learned, is not the same as forgetting. It is remembering without letting the memory take your oxygen. I decided to keep the stone in my chest, but I let it get smaller, like a pebble I could carry in my pocket when I needed to remember where my power lives. Some nights I would take out the recipe card and trace the blue letters: onion, cumin, patience. I would add my own word under hers: receipts. A month after the transition, we launched the first version of the new platform. It was not flashy. It did not have an anthem. It had a clean login, fast load times, and a Y button next to every metric that opened a plain language explanation with links to the math. We put a little note at the top: "If you don't understand, ask." The CEO from the acquiring company came to our floor and stood quietly at the back while my team did the demo. When he spoke, he didn't say disrupt or unprecedented. He said, "Thank you for doing it right." After he left, we ate cupcakes from a grocery store tray, the kind with too much frosting. The kind you only like when you are very happy or very sad. We were happy. I watched my team press their thumbs into the plastic lids and lick frosting like kids. I thought of all the rooms where people had laughed carefully to be safe, and how different this laugh sounded. Loose, unafraid, easy. I excused myself and went to my office to call my mother. I said, "We did it." She said, "Your grandmother would be dancing." I looked at the photo on my desk. I said, "She is." There were hard days, too. A person Eric had promoted struggled under the new system and quit in a sudden flare of pride. An old client tried to pull rank and request a backdoor to the numbers, just this once. We said no, and they took their business elsewhere, and we watched the revenue dip in a small, scary line on a chart. For a week, the building breathed a little faster. "Are we okay?" People asked without asking. I called a meeting and put the chart up. "Yes," I said. "We will lose business that only likes magic tricks. We will gain business that likes the truth. It takes time." I showed the pipeline of clients who left because they could not get clarity somewhere else. I showed the emails with subject lines that said, "Finally found partners who explain things." I reminded everyone that clean work is slow the first month and fast the second. You don't measure a new habit by the first day you try it. You measure it by how it holds you when you're tired. They nodded and went back to their desks. The next month, the line on the chart bent upward in a way that felt like a stretch after a long sit. One evening, I stayed late to finish a note for the board about the next quarter's goals. The floor was quiet. The motion sensor lights had to be waved awake every 20 minutes like sleepy kids. I opened the bottom drawer to grab a notebook and saw the pen with Eric's initials again. I held it and tried to feel something sharp: anger, victory, any of the feelings movies tell you to have when you win a fight. Nothing came. The pen was just metal and ink now. I wrote one line in my notebook with it: "We don't need this weight," and then set it back down. I realized in that moment that the face going gray in the boardroom was not my favorite part of the story. My favorite part was the way my own face looked in the bathroom mirror the day the folder disappeared. Tired, yes, but steady. And how that woman chose to be boring and clean and patient when it would have felt so good to be loud. I whispered to the empty floor, "Good choice." On the 6-month mark of the acquisition closing, I sent a company-wide note. It was short. 6 months ago, we decided to build a company that runs on clear math and clear credit. Thank you for asking hard questions, writing clean notes, and holding each other with respect. Here are 3 stories from this month where your choices saved us time, money, and dignity. I told those 3 stories with names attached because credit with a face is different from credit in theory. The replies filled my inbox with small love letters to good work. Someone sent a photo of the plant from the all-hands room. Green, alive, ridiculous. Someone else sent a recipe for a spice mix that made onions taste like a holiday. I printed a few emails and taped them to a bulletin board that had once been used to post sales goals no one believed in. That afternoon, I took a walk. The city was in that hour where the light is low and the pigeons look like they've had enough for one lifetime. I passed a cafe window and caught my reflection. I looked older than the woman who stood in the first glass room holding her torn report. I liked the way I looked. My shoulders were down. My mouth was soft. I pulled out my phone and opened a draft I keep for moments when I need to remember who I am. It has only 2 lines. The first is something my grandmother wrote. Eat. Then decide. The second is something I added. Decide. Then build. I put the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. If you are reading this in your kitchen or on your break or under a blanket after a day that chewed you up, I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't need to prove your worth to a person who uses the word replaceable like a trick. You need to learn your machine, keep your receipts, and build your future so clean that when the door opens, you walk through and no one can claim you got lucky. Don't waste your color making someone else gray. Use your color to paint a room where you and your people can breathe. If the room you're in right now makes you small, start building the map to another room. Glance at a lockbox. Keep a copy of the clause. Archive the email. Eat, then decide. Decide, then build. That night, back at home, I cooked again. Onions, cumin, a little heat. I ate standing up because I was too tired to sit, and the food tasted like winning without gloating. I pulled the recipe card from my wallet and smiled at the line that always gets me. Patience. My grandmother wrote it like a joke. Like, of course you put patience in the pan. Why else would the onions turn gold? I put the card back, washed the pan, and stood by the window. The city glowed like a quiet promise. I thought of Eric only long enough to realize I didn't think of him anymore. I thought of my team and their clear slides and the way they had learned to say, "I don't know yet," like it was the bravest thing in the room. I thought of the pen in the drawer, resting like a story prop retired after the play closes. I thought of the young analyst who asked me last week how to say no to a stakeholder who wanted magic numbers. I told her, "Say it softly and say it twice. We do evidence here." In the morning, I would go back to the office and sign a different kind of paper. A hiring letter for a woman who had taken time off to raise her brother and was coming back with fire in her eyes and a portfolio full of clean work. I would give her a laptop, a welcome, and a promise that her name would stay on what she made. I would walk past the boardroom where my hand once shook over a torn report and into the boardroom where my hand did not shake over an acquisition agreement. I would stop by the plant and water it. I would send a message to the team. Show your work today. If you don't understand something, make a note to ask. If you do understand something, teach it. If you make a mistake, write the why and the fix. We'll celebrate the learning. And then I would do the work. Not the cinematic version. The real kind. The kind that turns rooms around. If this story met you where you needed it, tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your couch, your quiet corner between things. Tell me the line that stayed with you. Like this if it gave you breath? Share it with someone swallowing the word replaceable tonight. Drop a comment to join the conversation about building with integrity. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because there are more, and every one is a map out of a small room into a larger one where your voice fits.